they had it up on the screen. Okay. So this is pretty sensitive. I do have up here for you to look at if you'd like after I speak some lovely rocks from Scotland. It's beautiful country. And when I was on Iona, I was able to find, it's called Iona marble. So I have a piece of marble that has the green serpentine in it. I have a large piece of serpentine, some of the redstone, um, and then just miscellaneous stuff. So certainly come up here and look. And before I begin with the slideshow, it's just going to give you a sense of where I went. But first, couple housekeeping things. Can everyone hear me really, really well? Is it loud enough? Great. I probably will talk about half an hour. I know the day is getting late and you might have things to do. Don't worry. If you need to go, just hop up and leave. Uh, I'm so grateful that I had this time. I began the trip to Scotland in mid-March, went to mid-April. It wasn't exactly the trip I had planned. I did all my scheduling in December and January, which if you remember what that was like, do you remember Christmas Eve here? When all of a sudden we had to like say, oh, we can't blow out candles. Omicron was a thing. And so as I was booking, much of my original plan, I actually couldn't book. So I condensed my time in Scotland to be a month rather than 6 weeks. And the trips in the US, I was going to go to Philadelphia and I was going to go to a thing in Maine. They also weren't taking bookings. It was a very uncertain time. But it was my third time booking this trip and I was going. But I am so grateful to all of you. You made this happen for me and it was the trip of a lifetime. So I've mentioned the 4 aspects of the trip. I spent a week in Edinburgh. I did a week roaming Scotland. It was supposed to be a group tour. I had the tour all to myself. I spent a week on Iona, and they usually book about 40 people in the trip. We were their first public group. There were only 9 in the group. And then I walked the Way of Cuthbert, which was just magical. Let's see if this works. It does. Martin Haworth was my guide. I spent 8 days with Martin. He's an expert in Celtic spirituality, knows a tremendous amount about the conversion of the Picts to Christianity. He's written 2 books of his 3-part trilogy. It's a novel on 6th century Scotland. It's wonderful. These are his words. Open my eyes that I may see thy presence that is all about me. Open my eyes that I may hear the voice that is quiet yet ever near. Open my heart that I may feel the love of my God close and real. Open each sense make me aware of the power in peace always there. So for me, it became a time of renewal and discovery. I focused my learning on Celtic spirituality, and it was a real renewal kind of post my time in Scotland, where I spent time with family. But one of the things I learned, and for any of you that have a Celtic background, one of the things I learned is the Scottish people are really such a blend. I did Ancestry.com, and what it shows is I'm 53% Irish, and then this mix of things. Yet my mother had always said she was 100% Scottish, so what was going on there? Um, but it shows Norse. I have a lot of Viking background. It shows Wales, and that would be kind of the Britons. Um, and it shows, of course, the Scots and the Gaels. And it's the Scotland is in a way unique, is that they were able to create an identity around who they were with this real blend of people. Many of them who were of Celtic background, just very distinct tribes. Edinburgh. One of the things I loved about it was the closes. If you've ever been to Edinburgh, it's of course way up on a hill. I stayed in Old Town, and I was fascinated with these alleyways. They're all over the place. And so to get from one part of town to the next, and they're as narrow as they look, and you just descend or climb up. Anyhow, you're going to get to see how I'm a little weird. You know that already. I stayed in Old Town. It is like stepping into a Harry Potter. Oh, you know what I haven't done? I haven't used slideshow, and then you get only one. There you go. Oh, okay. Never mind. It's fine. So Edinburgh's, this section is about 1,000 years old, and it is just delightful. I was able to enjoy it thoroughly. There I am with my rain hat on. One of the things that I quickly discovered is the need for a rain hat that not only kept me dry, but tied under my chin. I mean, you have to picture me walking through Edinburgh with my phone, using it as my map. It's pouring, and I had my hood on, but it just wasn't doing it, so I found a hat. You're going to see some notes off to the side. Don't worry about reading them unless you want to. During the trip, every day I sent a WhatsApp update to my family, and I've captured some of them here. Edinburgh Castle is everything you could ask for in a castle. It's architecturally stunning. It's the section of it for royalty is just beautiful. The castle was built in the 12th century, and it was on earlier fortifications. When the Romans came in 70 AD, or roughly 70 AD, there already were fortifications there. So it's been a significant fortress for thousands of years. But the existing structure, the earliest bit on it, is in the 12th century. But it's, of course, been a site of constant warfare, so it's been rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt, and was used by the Scottish Army until the 60s. One of the things I love about Scotland is their sense of mystery. In that very first picture, you saw me with the unicorn. Of course, the unicorn is the national animal of Scotland. Just wrap your head around that. The unicorn is everywhere, and I kept bumping into stories about King Arthur. Now, if you look, let's see if I can get the pointer to work. If you look over here, does it show up on the screen? Look at that, it does. Wow, this is amazing. So that is Arthur's seat. And Some say it's the site of Camelot. Of course, there were other places that said that they were the site of Camelot too. I'm going to share with you a little bit about Celtic spirituality. And one of the prevailing themes is a thin place, a thin place. And it's that place where you really feel God's presence. It comes from, is connected to even the world of the Druids, where they felt that there was this gossamer thin space between this world and the next. And there were, the ancestors were just on the other side. In the Christian world, it was also the angels were on the other side. There were, we weren't alone here. I experienced that again and again in Scotland. Every place you go, there is this evidence of the past. There are standing stones, burial cairns, ruins of abbeys and chapels and cottages. There's just this deep sense of the people that were there before. But it's something I've experienced here. I think when I go into the sanctuary here, I have this sense of God's presence. Going to the Grand Canyon, I have this sense of God's presence. One of the places I experienced it so completely here was when I was here was when we took the youth group to Ground Zero. You could feel the people there. So listen to these words about a thin place. A thin place this, where treads my foot more silently. There is magic here that stirs my vapid air. There's a thinness in this place, translucent to my senses, sensing I know not what, save that I am conscious of my hair, and that I breathe, that I can hear, that sound that silence makes, and know a warmth about my face, and that I walk more slowly home. Anthony Duncan. And then the other prevailing sense that I got there was this deep, deep connection with the natural world. Scotland is breathtakingly beautiful. There is water everywhere, there's mountains everywhere, and the part of Scotland I was in after Edinburgh was very thinly settled, so just beautiful. This is David Adam. I have seen the Lord where the mist rises from the sea, where the waves creep upon the shore, where the wrack lifts upon the strand. I have seen the Lord. Where the sun awakens the day, where the road winds on its way, where the fields are sweet with hay, I have seen the Lord. Where the stars shine in the sky, where the streets so peacefully lie, where the darkness is so nigh, I have seen the Lord. So with roaming Scotland, that was the second leg of my journey. I was traveling with Martin Haworth, and this is Argyll and Bute, and we traveled over much of what you see on the map here, ending up on Mull, the island that will then take me to Iona. We followed in the footsteps of St. Columba. He was a 6th century saint, and Columba really helped spread Christianity throughout Scotland. One of the cool things that St. Columba did was stilled the Loch Ness Monster. It's the first recorded story of the Loch Ness Monster in literature. Who was he? He was a prince of the O'Neill clan in Ireland. There he established several monasteries. But then there was this whole dispute over Abbot Finian's, his abbot's book of Psalms. Columba had copied it, but then Finian said it was his book, and Columba said, no, it's my book. So even saintly people fight sometimes. It led to a battle. They were a warrior people, remember that. Apparently 100 people were killed, and as his penance and punishment, he was exiled. And it was said he needed to convert at least 100. And so he sailed to Iona with 12 apostles, They were likely his kinsmen. And he established Iona as a seat of learning. One of the realities was that was Pictish country, and so there must have been some negotiation with the Picts there to allow him to take Iona. Iona Abbey, we think of it as a monastery, but it was nothing like the grand monasteries that I'll show some pictures of. It would have been made of timber. Most of the worship would have been outside, and they called themselves a community of heaven. Highly regarded by the Gaels of Dalriada and the Picts. He was a contemplative, he had a hermit cell, and he was very learned. All right, here I am again. It's my first day with Martin, and that day it rained, it hailed, the sun came out, and with it came a rainbow. And just these are just a few of the pictures. It's beautiful, beautiful country. This was quite an adventure. So on March 20th, it was the spring equinox. And of course, the Druids knew so much about the heavens, and they had these stone circles they built to mark the movement of the sun. But it does weird things to the tide. There was a sandbar that came that we needed to cross over to get to this island. And Martin showed me, the tide chart, and we confirmed that we were safe between 10 and 2. We were on the island at 10:30. We're at the cave that we're going to explore by 11:30, except the tide was coming in like crazy. And we realized we were trapped. So if you look at right at the edge right there of the cliff, if you turned your head, the water was all the way up and deep to the cliff. We had no idea when the water was going to disperse, and Martin had started a fire, and we were prepared to be there for hours. But about 2:30, the tide just receded really quickly, and it was safe. But it was an amazing adventure. One of the things that stirred me over and over again was the ancient people. These are called ring and cup markings. They're probably 4,500 years old, and they're all over the place. They don't really know what they were used for, but they likely were some sort of pre-Christian ritual. This is Keel's Chapel. It is a 12th century chapel, but within it is a 7th century cross. So it was built on a site that had been used as a chapel earlier. It was one of those thin places that had an amazing feeling inside. But what you see along the edge and on the ground are grave slabs. I probably have 50 pictures of grave slabs, but I decided to spare you. They're really cool. It was an art form of the day. They get very intricate. They have both Pictish and Christian symbols on them, a lot of the Celtic knot, but this is all you see. Here we were at Dunad, which is the seat of Dalriada, which is where Scotland was born. It's where Scotland began to become unified. And the green shows that section of Scotland. And you look, and it also includes part of Ireland, because the borders really truly had not yet been formed. My hand is on the inauguration stone, and if you look, that's a foot my hand is into. So the king, when they were being inaugurated, would set their foot in the place where my hand was, and the druid would anoint them. This is an ancient burial cairn. You see, it's ringed by stones. They, of course, would have been much taller in the day. And again, I found this, a thin place, very moving. This is, 3,000 years old, perhaps. It's ancient. And inside, it was a tomb. So after Martin, although we spent 2 days at Mull, I had 2 days there myself uh, before I went to Iona. And that day, I went on this great loop walk. I went past Standing Stones, farms, moors, beaches, and then back to the little place, the little village of Finport. While I was walking, I happened upon this local woman. I heard her before I saw her. So I'm walking along and I hear someone yelling, hollering. I didn't have any idea of what she was saying. And then I got into view this woman who had on a long skirt, an apron, and her hair in a kerchief. It could have been hundreds of years ago. And she was yelling in Gaelic at the sheep that were eating her flowers. She saw me and she turned and spun around and started speaking to me in English. And I had this most lovely chat with her. I wished I could have got a picture of her, but I felt that would have been too intrusive. But it was absolutely delightful. And it's a bit of an example of the hospitality I experienced. So now I'm on Iona. Iona often is called the birthplace of Christianity in Scotland. There certainly were people there who were spreading Christianity beforehand. When I was with Martin, we walked along the route that Kesed took, which was before Columba. But it was from Iona that Christianity really took root. It's a tiny island. It's it's 3 miles long, 1.5 miles wide. And there you see the abbey that was taken on the ferry ride over. It has some of the earliest standing crosses. One of the things you realize when you're there is these crosses evolved out of the Pictish influence because they had the standing stones. Well, we needed standing crosses. And this is from the 8th century. The circle, again, would have been from the Druids. The sun, they worshiped the sun. The circle was a holy symbol for them. And so what we saw with the early Christians is they really worked within the existing frame of spirituality. And this is the group I was with. It really was an interfaith group. We had 4 Muslim women. We had a minister from the U.S. He's Presbyterian. He's the guy on the ground. And then several people from the UK, from England, within the UK. I am standing there in the nunnery. I had heard it's called Iona Abbey and Nunnery, but it never occurred to me that there was a nunnery. So the abbey was built in 1200. The nunnery was also built roughly 1200. The abbey's been restored. The nunnery hasn't been restored. The abbey was built on the land that would have been the original monastery. Again, the early Celtic Christians, they would have been very simple wooden structures. Most of their worship would have been outside. But then the Roman flavor of Christianity came in and they built elaborate abbeys more in the style of the Romans. During the Reformation, the abbeys across the UK, of course, were destroyed. And so it wasn't until the 1930s that Iona Abbey was rebuilt. George MacLeod is the person who established Iona Abbey. Not only was it rebuilt, but the community was formed, and it was workers or parts of people in the community that rebuilt the abbey. I was asked if I would like to be a volunteer there, and when they were looking at my background, the operations manager pulled up the UCC, and she said, I could have been reading about our vision statement as they looked at the vision statement. It's very much aligned, very ecumenical, interfaith in spirit, with this sense and desire of justice and peace. There we have the standing cross again, and you see me working in the kitchen. When you go to Iona Abbey and you stay in the Abbey, you get a job. And I was a kitchen worker. I was really moved by the nunnery. Again, because they were the woman, there's no written record actually of what went on there. Um, and it has not been rebuilt. But it's a beautiful, beautiful space. They've done a lot of work to begin to reclaim what would have been the inner garden. You see a little bit of that there. And here we have a grave slab. I guess I said I didn't have any other grave slabs. This is the one I chose. She was a prioress in 1543. Beautiful, beautiful when you see it live. And angels are holding her pillow. I just chose a few pictures of Iona. I certainly could have included more. The colors, the light, um, the reality of having water everywhere was just stunning. Iona pilgrimage. Lord, I ask only this, that you would meet me on the road and that I, expectant, would recognize and know you in your coming and so find my life transformed. So after Iona, I made my way to Melrose. And as I said earlier, it was quite a journey. It took me, I think, about 10 hours to get there, but I made it. And the red line is where I traveled. It's just about 70 miles. We actually walked a little bit more than that because sometimes you'd get to the way and then you'd have to walk to your B&B a couple miles. But, it was roughly 70 miles. Who was this Cuthbert? He was roughly 100 years after Columba. So he was, would have been one of the monks kind of trained in the style of Iona. He was a monk, he was a prior, an abbot, and a bishop, so he moved along the ranks. But what he was known for was his charisma, generosity, gifts of healing. He brought in the Roman ways after the Synod of Whitby. So there was this, so the Celtic Church, because it was so far removed from Rome, developed separately from the influence of Rome, and it had different practices, and it had embraced much of the spirituality of the people of the land. Um, and it was agreed that they would switch to the Roman ways, and he brought those in. He was a contemplative. He was actually a hermit, and he spent as much of time as he possibly could on the inner farms. And there was a cult of Cuthbert that rose up. The Vikings began attacking the area, and his body was moved from place to place to place. Now you got to remember, they were like, there were 6 guys would take his casket and they would carry his body all over these hills to make it safe from the Vikings. He ended up at the Durham Cathedral, where you can still see him today. But it was a time when relics had great importance, so there were healings that occurred. All right, welcome to Melrose. It's a border town, it's a market town, it's really cute, and I didn't take any pictures. I apologize. But I took pictures of the area. I got the sign. This is Melrose Abbey. It's actually called St. Mary's Abbey. It's close to, but not on the site of the abbey that Cuthbert would have begun his career at. Cuthbert grew up in the Melrose area, and his first position was at Melrose Abbey. These are the hills around Melrose. And I began by going through the Eldon Hills. It was another place where King Arthur is buried, right in those hills. We walked along the River Tweed in the Deer Road. The Deer Road was built by the Romans about 1900 years ago. And this is a picture of the B&B I stayed at. styles. Styles are a thing in Scotland. It's part of Scottish law is you get to go into the fields where the sheep and the cow are. Now just wrap your head around that. And so these styles are every place, and you're going from field to field to field. That's a really good style. Not all of them are really good. Here I am at the border. One side says Scotland, the other England. It was raining. I couldn't get a good picture. This was a pilgrim day. Crossing the hills, I was with Elizabeth Cook. I often walked with her. I was so glad I was with someone. It started out with rain, it then hailed, and then it snowed. And this was also a pilgrim day. This is a bit of the North Sea. To get to Lindisfarne, the Holy Isle, where Cuthbert ended up his days, you cross this causeway that appears at low tide. When we got there, it was supposed to be the crossing time, but it wasn't quite the crossing time yet. So when I began, it looked like this. By the time I got to the middle, it was above my waist, and it was the North Sea in April. This is what it looked like as well when we began. So that's the first full. Luckily, when we got to the hotel B&B where we were staying, it had a pub, and our rooms weren't ready, but they sat us down, gave us a bowl of soup and a shot of scotch. Everything was infinitely better after that. Lindisfarne also has the ruins of an abbey, which was very lovely to see. It's bigger than Iona. You have more of a sense of a community there. But listen to these words. Leave me alone with God as much as may be, as the tide draws the waters close in upon the shore. Make me an island set apart, alone with you, God, holy to you. Then with the turning of the tide, prepare me to carry your presence to the busy world beyond, the world that rushes in on me till the waters come again and fold me back to you. So one of the questions Martin asked me was, well, what are you going to do with all of this? What he recognized is my plan really was fully give me a full sense of Celtic spirituality, and he wanted to know what are you going to do with this? And I said, I don't know. When I got to Iona, the warden, you could think the abbess, said, frame it as, where is it? Where are you walking towards? And so I leave you with these bits of Celtic Christianity, bits that I think we have embraced here in many ways, but can use as a refresher and as a way to look at the world. Creation's good. Creation is good, which means that we care for it. Christ in the Celtic spirituality is looked as a liberator of good people. Not, there isn't this original sin aspect. Christ is the liberator of good people, and creation is good. Poetic use of language. They see Christ in the other. I really experienced that again and again when I was with people. Always seeking Christ. Be Now My Vision was written somewhere between the 6th and the 8th century. It's a Celtic hymn. It's that sense of always seeking God. Contextualization, honoring existing beliefs. Community, deep community, community of belonging, identity, security. As Isabella said to me, neighbors know and care for each other. A simple lifestyle, very simple lifestyle. Care for creation, intuitive, mystical, contemplative. And these are my ending words. This is Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan. We go on pilgrimage so we can go back home and know that we never need to go on pilgrimage again. Pilgrimage has achieved its purpose when we can see God in our everyday and ordinary lives. Richard Rohr. Any questions for me? Thank you. It's because of you I got to do this. Any questions or insights? It was all amazing. I did really like the walk, walking the way of Cuthbert. I didn't talk about Elizabeth Cook, I'm sensitive to the time. So I met along my walk Elizabeth Cook, and many of the days when our B&Bs met up, we walked together. She's a poet and novelist. Um, I didn't know about larks. I had heard the term, but I'd never seen a lark. So she wrote this poem. It's called An Introduction to Larks for Beth. And it'll be in her next collection. She's edited it and sent me the more recent version. And it was delightful to walk with her. It was actually delightful to experience the blizzard and to walk through the North Sea. Um, but Iona is a very magical place. So part of my plan is to hopefully go back there as a volunteer for 3 to 4 months, hopefully in 2023. I'm hoping March through May. I mean, there's something about New England in July and August. um, yeah, the days were longer, which was nice. Yeah, yeah, longer days, a milder climate. I was on the west of Scotland for much of it, and there were palm trees. I kept looking at what a so milder. It was, I went mid March, and spring was fully present in mid March. It was probably 75-ish for that week, the way of Cuthbert. So some days it all depended on where the next B&B was, because we were in very remote sections, so it wasn't like we were necessarily going into villages. I mean, there was one day I walked, I know, 17 miles, but there was one day I only walked 8 because that was where my B&B was, so it did vary a great deal. And then there's the day you get lost. I did. As soon as I got home, I went looking for how to read a map and compass. Because when you go hiking in the US, you get on a trail and there are the blazes. And you go from blaze to blaze to blaze. Well, Scotland had all its trees cut down for the sheep. So when you're hiking, when you're on these trails, there's no defined path necessarily, like the way of Cuthbert. It's a popular one, but I was there at the very beginning of the season, so there was, often no one around. I had at least 2 days where I didn't see another soul. And so a couple times I did get a little lost because you couldn't see the next place to go to. But now I know how to read a map and compass. I'm good. Um, Anyone else? Yes. Well, that was, so Martin asked me, what are you going to do with this? Um, I think he couldn't believe I was given all this money to do this. Um, and I looked at him and said, I don't know. I'm retired. So I can't really bring it back to the church that I serve. Um, so I don't know. I said, I hope to have this sense of call that I had when I went into the ministry, that it becomes clear to me, what do I do with this? Because I condensed all that I could have said into such a short time. So yes, I think it changed my trajectory. I mean, it's certainly that sense of experience God in the moment was brought back to me, but how do I share it is not clear to me. Maggie. Oh, that sounds like work, but yes. Possibly. Yeah, I mean, maybe I have written poems. I'm more apt to write poetry than actual books. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. So the oat cakes. So hiking, my daily food was oat cakes with peanut butter. Peanut butter is very American, so I apologize to the Scots. But I fell in love with oat cakes, and I have made some. I bought some today. They are ones that I made. I'm not going to try to make this, but I realized at the very end of my trip that I had not had any haggis, and it seemed wrong to leave Scotland without having haggis. It was on menu every day at breakfast, but they have this huge Scottish breakfast that I don't know how anyone could eat that includes haggis. So haggis is the basically it's what no one wants to eat. So it's the innards of the stomach and all that sort of stuff. But I went to this like gourmet bistro and had neeps, tatties, and haggis, along with this. Is it a skink? Along with the smoked hat. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's smoked haddock chowder. Yeah. So it began with so my meal began with smoked haddock chowder, which was delightful, and then the haggis was wonderful. It's almost like a meatloaf, but softer. Yes, yeah. It has oatmeal in it and spices, and it actually was absolutely delicious, as were the neeps and tatties. So I'm not going to try to make it, but if you go to Scotland, you need to have the haggis. I also had the blood pudding. I had that for breakfast one day. The stowaway but stoneway blood pudding with poached eggs on it. Again, I'm not going to. I don't know if I'll have it again, but it was worth having. Um, Thank you for that question. That's great. Yes. Yep. So there are days where you recognize that you're on a journey. And so I recognized that this time that I was seeking God. I had stepped out of my comfort zone. I was traveling during COVID. When I was at Iona, there was the had been an outbreak of COVID the week before, and the entire staff, one by one, you would see another staff member disappear. So it was a sense of seeking God, um, and being open to whatever God would reveal. You know. Anyone else? Thank you so much. You gave me such a blessing in this trip. So thank you. What is this? Yep.
So, I don't know if you remember ever seeing this quilt before, but it was part of our fall fair auction, the online auction, and our Faith Sherlock bid on it, and she won it. And her intention was to give it to you. And more so, it's not everyone in the congregation, but as many people as we could signed it for you. Do you remember I asked you that at the first meeting? It was blue, right? There you go. You're welcome. So on behalf of everyone in the church,